maybe you saw the clip of Sam Altman talking at a conference saying, we get a lot of because data centers cost a lot of energy. Well, humans cost a lot of energy too, and it takes 20 years to train a human. And I'm
there
just
was
thinking,
this movie called The Matrix.
I'm just thinking, yeah, this guy doesn't have kids, right?
Yeah.
This guy maybe doesn't really think about what it means to be human, which is so much of the beauty of life comes from those 20 years of training, of the struggle, of not having direct results.
Welcome to The Art of Quality, the podcast seeking wisdom in business, investing, systems, and the art of paying attention. Each episode uncovers stories from practitioners pursuing wisdom and excellence in their craft. We are seeking to understand how the world really works and how we can align our actions to it. I am your host, John Candeto. Our guest today is Eric Markowitz. Eric is a partner and the director of research at investment firm Nightview Capital and a former investigative journalist with bylines in The New Yorker, GQ, Fast Company, and other outlets. And in this conversation, Eric, William Oliver, and I dig into the cultural panic surrounding AI and push back against both the techno-doomers and the hyper-optimists, arguing that the real story isn't about the tools themselves, but about the worldview that treats humans as machines to be optimized away. Drawing on Eric's recent essay titled "It Was Never About AI," we explore why the companies, careers, and lives that endure are built on the things that AI can't touch: relationships, trust, struggle, craftsmanship, and the slow accumulation of quality over time. What emerges is a hopeful case that we may be entering a bull market in the humanities, where the most radical act isn't rejecting these tools, but refusing to let them flatten what makes us human. Please enjoy our conversation.
All right, gents, pleasure to be doing this. There are so many places we could get started here, and this will be, we'll cover a lot here, but there are things that have been on our minds and on many people's minds, all downstream from AI is getting really, really good and moving really, really fast. And that's rippling everywhere. Will, you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned that we developed a machine metaphor for life and society. This really began with the Industrial Revolution. And we made ourselves amenable to it. And now we're having a panic attack because much of what humans do is being taken by machines. I thought that was a nice setup. And then, Eric, you wrote a wonderful piece recently called "It Was Never About AI. We Are Not Our Tools." And one of the lines that stuck out to me was, and here I'm quoting, "Wall Street and Silicon Valley have formed a feedback loop of short-termism so tight, so self-reinforcing that they've confused efficiency with purpose, growth with meaning, and the elimination of people with progress." So take us into that, Eric. Why did you write this? What are you reacting to?
Yeah, I think this piece was bubbling for a while, probably for many years, actually, because, well, let's kind of like the why now of it was there was an essay that kind of went bananas on the internet by this guy, Matt Schumer, that I'm sure your listeners have heard or read. And it was basically saying that we've reached a point where AI is going to be able to automate everything. And it was very pessimistic about the nature of humanity, saying we're leading to a place where jobs are just going to be completely erased. And now is the time to get your finances in order because this is the apocalypse. And I think first of all, I don't agree with that premise. I think it's wrong. And I'm also not coming at it from the perspective of a super optimist either, of AI is going to make everything hyper abundant and we're all going to just lead perfect lives where there's not going to be any health concerns and we're all going to have access to everything. I think that there are going to be a lot of inequalities continuing. And I think continuing is the point, which is this has been in progress in my mind for the last 100, 200 years. An entire economic and capitalist system that is built on the premise that if a process can be made faster, it must be made faster. If things can be more efficient, they must be more efficient. if more profit can be extracted from a business, it must be extracted. And that's just one view of capitalism, right? I think the part that really bothers me is that is not the only definition of capitalism. And I think in particular, the type of companies that we're all interested in, and the companies that I'm researching for my book project, emphasize the direct opposite, which is that inefficiency often leads to the best innovation. Non-optimization leads to cultures where people actually want to stay and grow and build something meaningful. And ultimately, it's a choice. It's a choice of how to build a company, to grow a company, to invest. And I think that I wrote it because I wanted to emphasize that there is another option. I have no idea what's going to happen in the future. I just know that when we come to believe that there's only one reality, that there's only one version of what a business and what capitalism looks like, it becomes overly deterministic, and actions become a natural consequence of belief structures. And so you have to undermine and you have to poke at the belief structure to force people to see that, okay, just because you can eliminate 50 jobs, because in the short term, that's going to create near-term incentives, that doesn't necessarily mean that your business is stronger. And in a lot of cases, I think it becomes a lot weaker. So I wrote the piece hopefully to inspire people to think a little bit differently about either companies that they own, companies that they work at, the nature of their work itself. We are not just meat computers. Maybe you saw the clip of Sam Altman talking at a conference saying, we get a lot of shit because data centers cost a lot of energy. Well, humans cost a lot of energy too, and it takes 20 years to train a human. And I'm just thinking,
this movie called The Matrix.
I'm just thinking, yeah, this guy doesn't have kids, right? This guy maybe doesn't think about what it means to be human, which is so much of the beauty of life comes from those 20 years of training, of the struggle, of not having direct results from a particular action. When you teach your son how to throw a baseball, you don't think, well, if he's not going to do it today, then it's not worth it. Like the fun part is the struggle, is the accumulation of experiences that lead to getting better at something over time. And when you take such a techno-libertarian view that we must extract all of these sort of cost centers, it not only, I think, dehumanizes us, I think it makes us, as a capitalist society, as a meaningful society, just much more fragile. So I think that was the point.
Let me frame that a little more. I'm going to quote a little bit more from you and then get into the meat of this discussion. So you said later in your essay, this is not about AI. I need to say that clearly, and I need you to hear it. This was never about AI. Every generation has faced a version of this moment. I thought this historical perspective was wonderful. The printing press was going to destroy the church. The locomotive was going to destroy the human body. Electricity was going to destroy sleep. The assembly line was going to destroy craftsmanship. The internet was going to destroy truth. And every single time, the same question sat at the center of the panic. Even if nobody quite said it out loud, are we our tools or are we something more? This is about our relationship with tools. It has always been. So keep going there, because I think you're starting, or maybe we're starting to kind of get our finger on what's the stuff that feels weird and scary and overwhelming versus how is this just another version of a thing we've seen many times and incidentally survived every time and come out better for it.
Yeah. I think what I see right now is extreme fear and extreme euphoria. On the extreme fear side, it would be the idea that this technology is going to be weaponized against us and it's going to kill the economy and it's going to create an extreme K-shaped economy. On the extreme euphoria side, I think you see people talking about hyperabundance and UBI, and everyone is going to just lead happy, completely frictionless lives. I think the reality, as it always is somewhere in the middle. And when I think about these historic technologies, and maybe your listeners have read books like Alistair Nairn's book or Carlota Perez's book, big technological revolutions always have big winners and big losers. That's for sure. But the net outcome is almost always growth, which is good for humanity. And I think that it's very easy, especially now where we have these tools of social media that amplify the loudest voices, the most extreme perspectives, to start believing these extreme perspectives. But just as, let's just use cars as an example. The introduction of cars was a radically important change in human history. It wasn't just that we could get places faster. It just fundamentally changed the fabric of the economy and changed the fabric of society. I would say, on balance, having cars has been a great thing for humanity, right? I think we can all agree that the convenience, the safety, all of the bad things considered, it is better to have this new tool. I think AI is somewhere in that spectrum. I know it seems maybe to some listeners like AI is so extreme right now. It's going to do it. It's not. That's the thing. It's not going to be any different in my mind than any other massive technological revolution, in that there will be significant changes. The nature of work will change. The nature of companies will change. But over the long term, it's how we engage with the tool. And I think if you're thinking about AI as another productivity tool, as I do, I think it's great. I think it's a wonderful tool to use. But when you start thinking about AI as something that can replace everything within your own skill set or within your own career or within your own company, that's where things get really dangerous. And when you start outsourcing everything that you do to this new tool, then you become a much more fragile person, a more fragile organization, because you're losing the thing that makes you human, which is ultimately the thing of value. And so the advice or the insight that I have, which is not unique, but I think is important, is this is just another tool to use, but don't let the tool overcome your life or overcome your business or overcome your investment strategy or overcome whatever it is that you do every day. I think the irony to me in many ways is that we give this 10 years and you'll see that the companies that replace everyone with AI are going to be the companies that fail. And the companies that in the near term look not as profitable and slower and less efficient will still be around. That's the main point.
Yeah, you had a line from your essay. I believe that the companies that survive the next era won't be the ones that moved the fastest. They'll be the ones that moved with purpose. And I get it, but for just connect some dots for us. So you talked about institutional memory. You talked about choosing to use human research assistants versus replacing those with AI. Take us into some more of that. You have this very long-term view. You want to be around for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So why are you making these trade-offs? They're obviously economically non-optimized decisions in the very short run. So take us into why you've made those trade-offs.
We're all making stupid economic decisions every single day. Okay, we could eat beans and rice every single meal, and it would be a more economic and more efficient decision. We are constantly making decisions that are non-optimized. We just don't think of it that way. I think that when you take a step back, and what I'm really trying to get at in this piece and in general is we have a worldview that worships speed. We have a culture that has internalized this idea that bigger is better, scale is absolutely necessary, that we must move faster. And I think the velocity of information and the velocity of media only accelerates this dynamic. So if you pull up Twitter today, you're going to see people saying, I used an AI agent to 10x my revenue overnight. And so, of course, there's a fear of missing out on this boom. And so this has been going on for years, though. This is the Silicon Valley culture in a nutshell, starting probably in the late 70s, which is speed is God. We really do worship speed as God. And so everything that can be made faster must be made faster. If you think about what actually provides value and resiliency, things take time. It takes 9 months for baby to gestate, right? It takes 18, 25, 30 years for you to become a full adult. These things cannot happen overnight. Quality, I think the point of our discussion in many ways, quality only emerges with time. And when you have something that can be created overnight, it may look good on the surface, but I wouldn't define it as quality. I think quality emerges as a result of natural properties, and the most important natural property is time itself. So my point is, if you want to create something quality, if you want to create something that has purpose and meaning and that is actually enduring, and this is very relevant for anyone who's an investor, an entrepreneur, a CEO, an executive, an artist, a writer, the point is that you have to do it slowly. And it's hard to hear that because we're so ingrained into this idea that doing things faster is better. But it's a lie. And I think that's the important part, is that it's a lie. It's a lie that's been sold to us by people who want us to use their products and services and who want us to participate in a version of capitalism that doesn't necessarily benefit us. And let's use two examples. Let's say you're a student. Yes, you could use ChatGPT or Claude to do your homework for you. Absolutely. If you're a family office or you're a CIO at some big investment firm, you could eliminate all of your research analysts and you could just use any LLM to do the work. On the surface, on paper, this looks like the correct decision. It's faster, it's correct. But what happens when things change, when the dynamic shifts, when maybe there's a major global event that you weren't predicting and you suddenly need the insight of a diverse group of people thinking, talking, using their personal experiences to come at a new problem with the combined experience of people in the room. You could say, well, LLMs have all of those experiences. I don't think so. I really don't. I think that LLMs are programmed basically to predict the next logical sequence of any event, and it's ultimately just an average. When I think about when you go back to what actually has created massive change in society, it almost always results from some sort of human error. I think about the invention of penicillin with Alexander Fleming. And it was really just a laboratory accident. If you think of, if you believe that AI is going to create all of this new innovation, I think you're wrong. I just think it's incorrect. I think that it's an incorrect view of where positive change actually comes from. And I wanted this piece, and I want people to just really, really consider when they use these tools, what they're really going to get, because they're going to get something good, but they're never going to get something enduring and great. And we only have one life. You may as well pursue quality. And I also think it's a choice, right? I think that's maybe the major point I'm trying to make, which is why I mentioned that I have two research analysts, which is, yes, I could fire them and have ChatGPT research do the work that they're doing. But I can't tell you how many good ideas that they've come up with that I wouldn't have even thought to enter into a prompt that has made whatever I'm doing better. And maybe on the short term, less profitable. But my bet is that over the long term, having real people with real experiences coming from different backgrounds with a diverse set of experiences and opinions is ultimately the thing that is going to make my project successful.
Yeah, and that's very congruent if we go back to the historical perspective. It's very congruent with, one way to look at our relationship with tools. Ever since we started inventing tools, we would choose what pursuits we wanted, and then we would use tools in pursuing them. I.e., the tools are never telling us what to do. So we invent the plow, and then we say, hey, we can plant more, or we can plant different things, or we can plant in ground that was a little bit harder to plant in otherwise. But it was never, hey, plow, what should we do? It's okay, now you can help me. I think of, all technology, and if we kind of zoom way out and say technology is the application of knowledge to work, all technology has really been a version of what do we want to amplify? And for a lot of our human species, it was, okay, how do we stay warm and safe? And fire was a big piece of that. How do we produce enough food where we don't have people starving to death, and the plow, and eventually the Haber-Bosch process with fertilization, and so were big pieces of that. But in that historical perspective, tools have always been an amplifier of a means or a need which we set, and then we use the tools to pursue it. And I'm agreeing with you in the sense that I don't see good reason why this time it's different. We have no evidence that LLMs or any other form of artificial intelligence have will or can actually choose an end. They can optimize the heck out of things, but LLMs are probabilistic engines that are downstream from what they've been trained on. What they've been trained on is by definition historical. And so there's no genuine creation there. There's endless remixing of our language and so on, but there's no truly novel. There are things that maybe are so strangely mixed they feel novel, but they're not truly novel. And so if you go back to kind of some of your points, the relational, the creative, these are so uniquely human endeavors that require uniquely human attributes. I've been thinking in 3 C's lately: connection, creation, curation. These are uniquely human things, and they require human attributes like character, wisdom, judgment in order to enact. And so, Will, I'm going to pull you in here. You said to me a few weeks ago, we are entering a bull market in the humanities. And break that out a little bit. I agree with you, but bring us into that.
Well, that is a phrase I've stolen from a friend of all of ours, Josh Tarasoff. And I think we're in the middle of many things, and there's some part of this experience, let's say, that you could play with, in that sense, that there's like a deep realization that there are limits to this to the view that you've articulated, that you began with, Eric, of this sort of hyper-optimist, techno-optimist, machines are replacing everything. And moreover, I'd want to draw attention to actually the worldview that sits underneath that perspective, this idea of human as machine, which is a big part of that. And it's at that level that I'd start asking questions as to whether that really is an appropriate metaphor, and whether that metaphor might actually drastically limit what we think of as human, what humans are capable of, what it means to be human. So that's one thing to bring in. But I'm going to park that for a second and just play with a phrase from you, Eric, I believe, in a conversation we had a while ago, where you said to a group, no matter how good, or at least I think it was you or someone.
If it's smart,
asked,
it was me. Yeah.
Right? It was a good one. So you could take credit. You asked the group, even if the plastic flowers were indistinguishable from real flowers, would you give them to someone on a first date? And what is that? And just letting that sink in, right? No matter how much machines are able to simulate something, let's say alive, that they're not even relevant when it comes to, well, what is a first date? Or you could say, you might have even said, to your wife, or a first date, whatever it is. There's these experiences, these moments in a lifetime that sort of bring everything into perspective: love, children, professional fulfillment, the practice of a craft, music, art. What is uniquely real about the human experience? What is uniquely important, meaningful? And what I'd love to advance is that there's something about full participation in life. And this is where I'd bring in a framing from a cognitive scientist and philosopher, John Vervaeke. It's actually 2 neuroscientists, philosophers that I bring in. One is Ian McGilchrist, the other is John Vervaeke. For Vervaeke, there are a number of ways we can know things. He talks about propositional, perspectival, participatory knowing, that anything, when we look at machines and we look at the the architecture of today as it's conceived, artificial intelligence systems, these systems are trained on propositional knowledge. That is a tiny sliver of human activity that's recorded symbolically. So you're already talking about systems trained on language, which is a layer of abstraction on reality that's backward looking, right? There are other ways of knowing that really, really matter to what it might mean to participate fully in life, to be a human that is alive, participating meaningfully in the system of life. There are things that humans can learn that you can only learn through participation, and that will remain for much of our lives impossible to articulate in language fully. I'd suggest that for some of these most meaningful experiences, poetry is the only way to get close to them. That as David Whyte says, poetry is language against which we have no defenses. I forget who I'm quoting now, but the sense that poetry is language that you use to go beyond language. And the suggestion there is that there is a lot beyond the reach of language, which is a system of symbolic abstraction that sits on top of reality, right? The word, the moon, is not the moon, right? There is a incredibly rich context, let alone, you haven't even brought in this notion of the unconscious, either the personal or collective unconscious, that our experience of reality that exists within, that can be abstracted through language. In other words, to bring this to a point, there are vast amounts of information that sit outside of the reach of these systems today, let alone the fact that when you start thinking about this human machine metaphor and realize that in reducing life to something linear, programmatic, and quantifiable, you are leaving out a lot of what makes life meaningful, interesting, and worthwhile. I think when you tie all this together, you realize that, well, I think that a lot of what you're saying to me becomes quite obvious, right? And I feel like I love that we can frame it somewhat systematically as, one, the limitations of this machine metaphor, that there is so much more to life than what you can measure and translate symbolically. And I wonder what you guys make of that. That no matter how good the plastic, let's humor ourselves and say the plastic flowers get really, really good, you're still not giving them to your wife on your 20th wedding anniversary.
I'll quote a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon we've been kicking around. So it's Calvin saying, that's the whole problem with science. You've got a bunch of empiricists trying to describe things of unimaginable wonder.
Yeah. Let's linger on the flower metaphor, because I think it's really instructive. Why do real flowers, have meaning versus artificial flowers, which when you receive artificial flowers, there is some, I think everyone experiences, it's just not as good, right? It's hard to put your finger on exactly what it is, but it's inauthentic. And I think it comes down to the fact that flowers die, real flowers die. And there is beauty in the impermanence of a real flower, and that it's precious. And I think that what we're discussing is in many ways the same idea, which is there is beauty to things that are imperfect and flawed and ultimately impermanent. And the great irony that I see in this whole AI debate, in this conversation that we're having globally, is that we miss the obvious insight, the most obvious thing of all, which is that it's artificial, right? It's artificial intelligence. And we seem to forget that when we're actually interacting day to day, if you were to receive a phone call, let's say from your investment manager, who's a relationship that probably is really important to you, or from really anyone, an insurance agent, your real estate broker, and you suddenly discover that it's actually not them calling, and it's their 11 Labs voice programmed by an agent in an LLM, you're instantly turned off. Every single person has this experience. Same thing that's happening now with the amount of just AI slop and the amount of content that's being created online. And it may work in extreme cases or at a version of scale, like if you're calling your insurance company and you just need to get through the telephone tree and you're talking to an agent. But when it comes down to an actual transaction of when you care about a place or a company, a person, and they've outsourced themselves to a tool, it's no longer something, a company or a person that you necessarily really want to spend time with. And so that's, to me, the great irony of so much of the AI conversation being fueled to say this is going to make companies better. It's just going to make companies worse in many ways. And it goes down to the artificial flowers example, which is how many companies now are changing out their real flowers for artificial flowers. And yes, it's cheaper, and yes, they'll last longer, but there's going to be a competitor that comes along with a really nice real flower. And that's going to be what people actually want and to keep and to gift. So I think the most radical act right now is not to completely reject the tools, as in you're a Luddite and say, I'm never going to use this. I think the most radical act is to just be honest about what the tools are and what their limitations are. And I agree, even language, right? I agree with you. Language is just a tool. Someone much smarter than me has said that. Language is a tool. When we describe moon, it's not really describing the physical experience of seeing the full moon with someone you love or a group of friends late at night. It's just a word. It's just language. I think that the best careers, the best lives, the best businesses are in pursuit of something much more meaningful. I think all the great companies that we admire recognize this, which is it's not about the product or the service that they're selling. It's about something bigger. It's about the pursuit of perfection, about the pursuit of beauty, about the uniqueness of the quality of a product or service. And that's going to be the tension. When John and I were in Geneva at the watchmaking school, I think the director of the school said, really, it's just all about supporting innovation while respecting tradition, right? I think that is just universally true for every industry right now. How do you support innovation while respecting the tradition? And I think what's happening now is that people are forgetting the respecting the tradition part. And they're just focusing on the supporting innovation. And that leads to an imbalance that is not going to work out well for those who choose pure innovation, because innovation without tradition is not sustainable. So go ahead, John.
I think this gets, and we've all three poked at this in various ways in the past. I think this gets really clear when you consider the world through the eyes of the very young and the very old. It's not hard. We all have kids. It's not hard for us to watch our kids marvel at beautiful flowers in a way that they don't at artificial flowers. And they don't have the language and the analytical frameworks yet to sort of explain that. But it's very easy to see. Equally, when you consider the advice of elders or what people on their deathbed say, or people who have had, gone through life-threatening experiences, there is never a line that's like, man, I wish we'd automated a little more.
Right.
It always comes back to some version of, I wish I'd been a little kinder. I wish I'd valued relationships more. Relationships are the most important thing to me. I'm grateful for the beauty I was able to add to the world. It's these very ethereal things that are miles away from optimizing the heck out of stuff. and in some ways, I think that gets very clear, right? If we go to kind of what do we fundamentally value as a species, I think children give us a lot of wisdom in ways they don't know about. And I think our elders give us a lot of wisdom. And to your point, Eric, it's not, the wisdom is rarely like, I wish we'd hit the innovation lever a little harder.
Yeah.
They might be grateful for it, certainly. And innovation's a wonderful thing, but without grounding it alone doesn't stand on its own.
Just one other thought on that is it's hard to separate what's happening now with a culture that's been building for the last few decades around instant gratification. And it's really, it's hard to reject the opportunity to make something happen faster. But when you think about all of the good things that you've built and that you've created and the relationships that you've had, what makes them good and strong is the time, but also the struggle, right? You can't separate. There is no joy without pain. And I think the threat of using these tools to become us is that it goes back to what Sam Altman said over the weekend, which is humans cost a lot of money. There's a lot of energy that goes into creating, a worker. But that cost, that pain is the point. And if you try to just remove all friction, all struggle from the system, then we actually become much weaker. I mean, these are basic observations: no pain, no gain, never let a good crisis go to waste. Like all of these expressions that we've heard a million times, they are uniquely true. And I think my frustration with how AI is being positioned is yet another sort of idiocracy-like future where, there's just no friction anymore. You just press a button and you get what you want. And that's not what I want to teach my kids. I know that's not what you want to teach your kids, right? I mean, you want to teach your kids how that good things take time, that it is important to be patient, that you can't get everything you want at the toy store, that if you want to learn to draw or you want to learn to write or you want to learn to read, it's going to take time. And because that's what makes them stronger. I think that we become a lot weaker if we stop struggling. And that is one of the major threats of overusing these tools and letting them just become us.
You talked about, and I agree, and a lot of wisdom we can pull on from nature here, so that the trees that shoot up the fastest are the first to fall over in the storm. And it's because they haven't developed the root structures that make them ultimately resilient. I've been trying to think about specific ways that we can think about, or what are the things that we might obviously be missing by letting the tools go too far. And I mean that on our application of the tools. So I don't think this is perfect, but this is something I wrote in a note a few weeks ago. Machines can craft, but not create. Machines can optimize, but cannot will. Machines can scale thought, but not judgment. Machines can retrieve knowledge, but not ambition. Machines can automate what is, but cannot know what ought to be. And I think that's a piece of us understanding all of this. If you just strip out those things that machines can't do or will, to kind of your point on there's a whole world of knowledge that is closed to machines. If we imagine a world that just skips all that, what do we get? I agree. I think we get an obviously fragile world. I think we get a world that is much less beautiful, a world that has become closed off to human agency in a way that it can get pretty dark pretty quickly. The flip side of that is the whole history of machines and tools and humans has been humans using tools to amplify ends that we select. And so if we go at it from that angle, then what we desperately need now is the wisdom to know what to select.
Yeah. I like, maybe you've read his work too, but Rutger Bregman, and he wrote a book called Moral Ambition. And I think he's spot on, which is what we need right now is more moral ambition from leaders. And again, like I think that to characterize what we're talking about is not anti-AI or a Luddite perspective. I think we all use these tools, but everyone in their career and their lives will have to make decisions about how to use these tools, but I think more importantly, how not to use them. And we're at like an inflection point where I feel so, I suppose, passionate about this because it seems like so many people are just sort of walking off a ledge because they feel like they must. This is the natural progression. We must use these tools. there's so much cynicism right now about the nature of capitalism. And I think the pushback that I got to writing this piece was, cool theory, bro, but that's not how the world works. And, the cat's out of the bag, the genie's out of the bottle. This is what is going to happen, right? All these jobs are going to be lost, and it's just a done deal. I don't think that's true at all. I think we have an opportunity to make decisions now. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because I do think there's a lot of moral urgency to this, and that we all should use whatever limited platforms we have to advocate for what we believe is a more humane version of using these tools. And it's no different than, I think, any other type of advocacy. Like, if when seatbelts came out, you'd be insane to say don't use the seatbelt, right? It's a safety tool. I think we're in like a kind of similar dynamic where we have to kind of advocate for what we think is a good application of this tool and what is not a good application of this tool. And there is a moral urgency to it. I think it's because absent any moral urgency, then of course the world will go down this path. But I get the sense from talking to a lot of people that there's a lot of people that don't want to go down this path, and that the loudest voices saying, this is what's going to happen, these tools are going to completely replace we're going to have a completely agentic run economy. They have a specific motivation, which is they're typically selling part of this. But I feel that there is a lot of intrinsic pushback to this, and this voice should be growing. Not, again, as a Luddite perspective of these tools are bad. I use these tools. I think they can be great. I always have to caveat that because it's very easy to get into this sort of like binary debate of good and bad. Yeah. Life is all on a spectrum. It's all nuanced. But this is the time to really have these discussions and to really push people, because we're all facing these decisions of how it comes down to even basic things. Like, if you want to go to Greece and plan a vacation, yeah, sure, use AI. But also, if you're just going off of AI, it's no different than going to a Google list and just hitting up the specific spots. The best parts of travel for me, and I'm sure for you, has been the serendipity of not knowing, of just going to a place and just experiencing and just letting a conversation take you to a place that you didn't expect.
Which is a level of knowledge, to pull in the Vervaeke framework. That's perspectival knowledge and participatory knowledge, which is completely closed to machines, which is not good or bad. It just is. So we can, if we let machines run over everything, you basically say, I don't value those things. And you said, and I agree with you, Eric, those are the best parts of travel. And that's one little thing. And then we compare that with, I don't think it's hard to have the thing to push against. So another piece of writing, thing I wrote a few weeks ago, this narrow focused obsession with automation paired with carelessness about the broader living dynamics in the world has led directly to accusations of heartless leaders, soulless organizations, and meaningless work, much of which is on the precipice of automation to the point that we no longer need humans to do it. So it's if that's the thing that, we have some people saying this is where it's all going. And it is also true that tools have always been amplifiers of the ends that humans select. Then to your point, it's on us to select ends that, I don't think we want to go that way. So we need to select other ends than that. How do we do that? Well, we have to value certain things, including things that the folks at the vanguard of AI is going to run over everything clearly don't value, at least in what they say. There was a Bloomberg columnist who said, I wish I could remember who, but in response to that piece on, AI is going to eat up everything, he said, just because some software engineers had easy jobs that AI overran doesn't mean everyone's got an easy job. And that's a little piece of this, but I thought it was very fair. I thought about the rise and collapse of FTX. An interesting piece of that I thought got almost no airtime, but seemed clear to me from the beginning when I was just trying to figure out what it was, because it kind of came out of left field for a lot of us. I did what I know to do, which is I tried to go experiment. And obviously they hosted a platform there where they want you to trust them with some of your money. So I said, okay, let's do an experiment. I couldn't get a single person on the phone to try to understand what they were, who their custodians were, who their counterparties were, how they had presumably, market beating spreads by a country. I mean, all these questions that what I was trying to do was build trust with somebody there to the point where I could trust them with a little bit of my money to go experiment and learn. And they had skipped all of the human stuff, and so of course I stayed miles away, and I know a few other people who did. But my point is, you sort of can't skip how humans work if you want to serve humans. It catches up with you somewhere, and that's in building trust. That's in different forms of knowledge that machines can't get to, and so on. And so, some of this, I think there's going to be a natural pushback because we sort of just don't work the way that maybe some of the most robotic like humans might wish that we did.
Yeah. I spent a few days last week in Nashville touring one of the days was touring a manufacturing plant, and tools break all the time. This was my major takeaway from my time in this plant. And so much of the human energy is directed at fixing the tools constantly. And the most challenging part of running a manufacturing plant is in many ways finding the right people that have the institutional memory and also the new ideas to fix the tools when they break. And inevitably, AI is going to break for people. If you have an organization where you just eliminate all humans and implement an LLM wrapper to conduct your business or conduct your life, there will be times when it just won't work. And then what happens? Right? I think that's the major missing part about this conversation in my mind, is that tools break just like the plow breaks, but it takes people to figure out how to fix it. The tools are not necessarily good at fixing tools, right? Like, I don't think if you pull up ChatGPT and says the server's down right now, you can't say, well, fix the server. It just won't. You need humans to actually fix it.
Look at what's going on in the world of power infrastructure, which feels obscure, but it isn't, right? If the electricity went out for any of us, our primary job would become very quickly getting it back on.
Yeah.
And if you go look at what actually happens, electricity was invented and grew so rapidly, so really much of it's over the last century or so, that the engineering behind it is a complete mess. And there's an enormous amount of institutional knowledge wrapped up in people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And for various reasons we don't have to get into, a lot of that knowledge hasn't been passed down. And so we're in the situation where we get this very fundamental thing that we all deeply rely on to be safe, to be comfortable, to be productive. And there's fragility in a system like that because, back to your point, humans have all these ways of knowing and knowledge and so on that we can't just give that problem to a machine and then off we go. Yeah. And you can find that, I kind of think of the thought experiment. If my power went off, I really need it and I don't know how to fix it. If my internet went out, I really need it and I don't know how to fix it. And I can just go down the list. And all of this comes back to, okay, we've chosen the things that are important to us that we amplify through tools, but we need people who are masters of those tools. And it would be foolish to think that dynamic will change.
Yeah. Also, if you look just talking about the history of technological revolutions, given enough time, they're always a net new job creator. And that is maybe one of the biggest fears about AI right now, is that it's going to decimate jobs. I think that there's a bit of like Jevons paradox here, in that we don't really know what these jobs necessarily will look like. But I was in an Amazon fulfillment center, I don't know, last year, and they are highly, highly automated places. They have mostly removed, they've removed a large percentage of humans from the factory, from the fulfillment center floor. And yet, in that fulfillment center, there were actually net new jobs created, because you need more highly skilled technicians to manage the robots, to oversee the infrastructure. And when there's so much fear mongering going around about just how this is going to destroy labor, I just react somewhat viscerally to it, because it is so at odds with the long-term nature of technology cycles.
Yeah, all of human history, all of it, on a long enough time horizon, has been technology is a net new creator of wealth and jobs. And then I think there are reasonable fears on short-term transition periods and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
just big picture, you're not going to find anyone who says, man, I wish we hadn't invented the plow. Milton Friedman was talking to, I forget who, but a communist who was talking about how important it was that everybody have a job. And so they said, we should not bring in industrial farming equipment because we need to employ people. And he said, well, then you should be digging your ditches with spoons. And I mean, some of that's a value claim, right? But it kind of gets at the point here, which is the whole historical record is technology in the long run has been job accretive and value accretive.
One of my favorite books is this book, Working by Studs Terkel. I think it was 1974. And he just went around and interviewed people about their jobs. And so many people just said, I feel like I'm a cog in the machine. I'm just a number on a spreadsheet. And I think that what we do have, and I'm very optimistic about, maybe this is along the lines of what Tarasov is getting into with his, we're in a bull market for the humanities, is that my hope is that we can use this moment to make jobs, to make lives that are more meaningful, to get us away from types of work that for many years have felt meaningless. And so many people now have just basically email jobs and pushing numbers around, responding to things that feel pointless. And my hope is that this is maybe the flashpoint or the turning point to create a more humane and human-centric version of the economy. Machines can do certain type. Yeah, go ahead.
Have you come across the term human API?
No.
That one really stuck with me. I was reading something or other, and here's something that we've all experienced. So we've all used CRM systems in some form. And I'll just say, I don't think there are any really good ones. You kind of, you get the thing going, it connects to your email, but sometimes it breaks and you go and try to manage a record and doesn't have the right data. And the point of this thing I was reading was we have just millions of jobs where the human is sort of a stand-in for stuff that ought to work better. The Amazon fulfillment center was a great, I don't know any 10-year-old or 12-year-old or whatever who's like, well, when I grow up, I really just want to run around a warehouse and grab a bunch of stuff that's, an iPad tells me what to do. And I put it all in a box and I just do that all day. It's not a terrible job, but equally, I think we'd all agree that humans, are capable of much more. And so, I don't know anyone who kind of says when they're 10 or 12 or 15, man, I really want to be a stand-in for Salesforce because Salesforce software is okay, but not great. Or I really want to pack boxes because the technology can't do it. And so there is a bright version of this, which is, we can, in the fullness of time and in the right way and with wisdom, stop treating humans like machines and start treating more humans like humans. And a huge piece of that is the machines need to be better. And we have an opportunity with AI to do some of that.
Yeah. My view is that there will be certain companies that use cost savings that they get from using the tools to employ more people to do more human-facing work. And that will make them much stronger companies. So a company, let's say, lays off 20% of their coders to use AI and maybe replaces them with, I don't know, people whose job it is just go spend time with their customers, right? To improve the relationships on the ground. Those will be the companies that benefit from this. The companies that don't recognize that this all gets into, I think, bigger issues around just financialization and greed. And the most, as we've all seen in the markets, the most profitable companies are not necessarily the companies that you want to invest in. And I mean, I mentioned Amazon in the piece. I think it's obviously changed in the last 5-10 years, but in the early days of Amazon, Jeff Bezos set out to be directly unprofitable, right? I mean, I think that's the point, is that companies, people that recognize that in the short term, yes, like use my example of human researchers. It's a very small example, but it's instructive. In the short term, yes, it is unprofitable, right? It is not necessarily the right, quote unquote, business decision, but there's a lot of off balance sheet intangible value that you get from people. And I think relationships, human relationships, may become the most valuable thing that we have, both as individuals, as companies, as as a species. And my hope is that this, if AI can do anything, it can free us from the drudgery of work that we don't want to do to focus on building more meaningful human relationships with each other.
Yeah, I think if the question is what are the scarcest things in the world, time, energy, and perhaps especially trust are my answers. And trust is really a relationship, right? And so
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I also think there's a very strong historical record there. And there's no reason why, for the reasons you just laid out, that shouldn't continue to be valuable. And I do think all of that is downstream from humans choose the ends and technology is an amplifier of the ends. But we're still picking the ends, and we're still picking who to pursue the ends with and who to pursue the ends for. And that means, time, energy, trust is a critical ingredient in there, especially trust. One way to think about it, I don't like this framing, but let's say the returns to trust probably go up. And I don't just mean financial returns. I mean richness of life returns. The AI, the web is turning to slop. It's hard to trust what you read anymore. So we're probably calling each other a little more than we used to. And I don't see that as a bad thing.
I agree. I'm actually very optimistic about this path. And I think more and more people will recognize it. And I think you're going to see more. I think COVID also, it was an interesting time for this sort of to precede AI. It was COVID, which was, we all got locked away in our rooms for a few years and making us feel completely disconnected. And then we have the AI revolution come to make us feel even more disconnected, because you don't even know if what you're reading is really from a human, the person you're talking to on the phone is a human. So I like to believe we're, yes, in a bull market for the humanities, but also in a bull market for just real in-person interaction again and building trust within communities. I think more people I speak with are more desiring of really finding community where they live and finding community in their professional circles. I think we're a reflection of that in many ways, right? The three of us and our sort of contingent of friends in this quirky ecosystem. I think that AI is only making us want more of that interaction and trust and relationship building. And that, not to be crass about it, but I do believe like that is, for businesses, for invest, like that is something that is going to be very profitable, and profitable in multiple senses of the word. I think meaning to me is probably the most important one, and purpose and joy and contentment and feeling really at ease with one's life is, I mean, as you both know, like I went through a very bad personal medical crisis, and the only thing that really saved me was relationships. Absent relationships, I wouldn't probably be alive. So I just think what a wonderful opportunity that this moment is giving us to really kind of focus on what actually matters. And yeah, I'm an optimist.
Yeah. I put this in a different piece a few months ago. The gravity well of human values is more focused on amplifying humans than amplifying machines. And for all the joys found pursuing great, big, beautiful tomorrows, abstract ideas of progress do not get much attention from one's deathbed. Faith, hope, and love do. And we could add to that joy, relationship, etc.
Yeah. Look at the next time you're like, just look around. If you're in a crowded room, you see people's phones. What's on the background of everyone's phones? For me, it's my two kids. What's on the background of your kids?
Yeah.
What's on your wall at your home? Maybe some art, but probably pictures of your family.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the things we actually value? Are the things we put up? There are trophies. Machines are not our trophies. No, I haven't met anyone that's put, I don't know, a compressor up on their wall.
Yeah. Here's my old AC unit. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Will, I'm going to bring us to a close here, but Will, you've been very pensive. I know people can't see your face, but you've been almost meditative through this. So I'd love to know what's going on in your in your wonderful head before we wrap here?
Well, I just want to amplify what Eric has said around the centrality to this whole question of quality in relationships. And what does it mean to be a human being? Seems to me that being connected to other humans and creating with other humans is a lot of what we're all seeking. And I did want to bring in, these frameworks for ways of knowing. We touched on some of those, but to really articulate it explicitly, it's that when we think about our capacity to relate as human beings, it goes far beyond the use and manipulation of propositional knowledge. And so that's where I'd leave us from my side. It's that quality in relationships, I feel like it's going to become a lot more obvious that that's where the action is. And therefore, that there seems to be a huge prize in cultivating our capacity to relate more creatively, more deeply. And so I'm pretty excited about what's ahead. The chaos notwithstanding that is inherent to all of these revolutions as they unfold. But
well,
yeah,
I agree. I'll close on everything comes in cycles, and maybe for the last 100 years we've been in a down cycle of human relationships where the loss of community, the loss of trust in institutions has been on a downward spiral. And if you think back further, that wasn't always the case, at least in the micro sense of people had communities, people had something that tied them to a place, to other people. We live very scattered lives, at least I think many of us feel as though we're not connected to some central unit. And my hope and my optimism is fueled by like, this is just another cycle, and we're now going to enter this upcycle, and it's going to be really wonderful of people wanting to really think about community and love and relationships, and that it will reflect itself however it must in business. But what really matters is that we're all pursuing this in our own lives and be models for others, because I think that's maybe the most important part, is that we have the opportunity to model this behavior and emphasize that it's working.
Yeah, we are entering a bull market in humanities and in relationships. Let's go model it. I love that. Let's thank you both. This was great. Let's wrap it there.
All right,
great fun, guys.
This was awesome.
Thank you for listening. For more resources, please visit our website, theartofquality.co.